you for joining our session this afternoon. I'm sure you've all been to a lot of great sessions already. So we're going to go through this and talk about building secure, adaptable AI modules in Drupal. So I guess I'm not going to spend the next 45 minutes really focusing on what amazing things AI can do, since there are so many of them, and I'm sure you've all seen a lot of them depending on the sessions you've been to. Instead, I really want to talk about the kind of less glamorous questions out there, and that is, what happens when someone says, that was a great AI demo, but now let's put this into production. So a lot of times, people hear that and they say, yes, that's great, I'm excited, they want to use my solution in production. But then it kind of sinks in a little bit later and they say, well, how do I actually do that? How do I get this into production and have it operate safely? So today we're going to talk about having a production deployment in mind from the outset by building these secure and adaptable AI modules in Drupal and the best practices for getting them on government platforms. So just a little bit about me. My name is Rob Morris. I work for CTAC. We've been a long-time sponsor of Drupal GovCon. CTAC is a small business based in Northern Virginia that provides all sorts of technical solutions, from the application design to back-end code to the infrastructure that it all runs on, since we are an AWS advanced partner. We work with all sorts of public sector agencies from large to small, and we've been doing so for over 30 years. I myself have been working with Drupal for almost 15 years, but I've been in the PHP CMS world for even longer than that. I have Acquia Drupal certified developer certifications for Drupal 7 through Drupal 11, and of course Drupal 12 is right around the corner. And through our company's Digital Innovations Lab that I co-chair, we've developed multiple modules, including AI modules, some that are already in the community and some that we'll be talking about today and will be out in the future. And we'll just talk about our agenda really quickly. So first we'll go through our thesis of why AI needs a platform. We'll talk about designing AI native Drupal modules, putting it into practice, operating AI in production, and a Q&A at the end. So we made this a beginner level best practices session, so we'll probably move pretty quickly since we've got a lot to touch on in 45 minutes. And we want to make sure there's time at the end for questions and answers, so if you can, please hold your questions until then. So first, our thesis of why AI needs a platform. And really, it's because the real work comes after the pilot. So the main issue in government teams, that government teams encounter when creating AI solutions is not that the demo cannot answer a prompt or answer a question or return some information. The issue really occurs when that solution is put into real context with governance and risk. The plan for that, cost control, clearance workflows, maintaining technology, and auditing the solution are often overlooked at the outset. So what does this mean? So really it means that getting an AI tool to answer something, it is really the easy part to make that demo. It's something looks good, it works well, that's the easy part. The hard part is really making that solution secure, affordable, maintainable, and accountable when it's inside of government workflows. A pilot just proves that something can work, but production must prove that it provides a measurable value to the agency and that they can trust it and operate it over time. So this comes in the form of a continuous security review, as I'm sure a lot of you are aware of if you work with the government. It comes from the content workflows being locked down by your modules. It comes from ensuring that operations function efficiently and securely behind the scenes, and of course by maintaining it. So it is Wednesday, so I don't know if some Drupal developers are here. We know on Wednesdays there are often security releases that come out right around now, 2 o'clock, so some of you might be checking your phones, your emails, and a lot of times you'll see the AI modules pop up, and often some people might say, hey, I see this module popping up all the time with security issues, vulnerabilities being disclosed. I'm not really sure if that's a good thing for me. But in actuality, it's a great thing, because that means people are actually using it, people are understanding what's going on, people are finding issues, they're remediating it, and they are disclosing it to the community. So when you see things like this, you know that someone's on top of it, this maintainer is doing a good job of getting rid of these issues, and of course that is something that you want to be seen as when you are running a government platform and you want to be seen as a trusted module developer. So Drupal should be the application control plane for your AI. So we want to treat AI as a platform capability governed by Drupal and not as a one-off integration hidden inside some custom code that you've got. We want to make sure that authoritative AI work is less about a perfect prompt and more about control change and information retrieval. So in Drupal natively, we've got all of these sorts of permissions, access controls, things that allow privileged users to dictate who can do what and to what extent they can actually do it. So we want to use that as our base to build whatever type of AI that we want to make on top of that. So from there, only specific data should be moved into our next line upstream. So our AI orchestration, our profiles, we want to make sure that our policies are only going to get the minimal amount of data that we have passed through from our permissions and access controls. And then, of course, making our API calls outside the bounds of our network or our Drupal website to various AI providers such as OpenAI or Bedrock, Gemini, etc. This is really going to require your users to understand how their data is controlled and stored. So once things leave your system, they make it to those third-party ecosystems, you're really going to be subject to whatever policies and procedures that they have on their side. So you really want to ensure that your module is going to allow your users to only send what the user is going to deem acceptable and make them aware of the importance of that. And finally, your evidence control loops. Your audits, evaluations, user feedback, etc. So this is what's going to be used to really strengthen items downstream to ensure that everything is secure and can be as efficient as possible. And now we've got our 5 questions to answer. So we're going to start our Drupal module. Let's see if we can answer 5 questions. So first is our use case. Should this be AI and where do humans fit in the loop? And so when I ask this question, I always think about Jurassic Park. So Jeff Goldblum's character in Jurassic Park, he said, scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could do something, they didn't stop to think if they should. And that's really true with AI because everyone wants to put AI in their websites, everyone wants to use AI, but you need to make sure that you're actually solving a real problem. You want to make sure that your users are actually getting benefit from it, and it's not just a case of, I want to build something just for the sake of it. You really want to make sure that there's true value that comes behind it and helps people get to their desired mission goals. And so with that, I would like to say, having a human in the loop is essential. We see the news these days, we see that, companies are having bad things happen and they say, it wasn't us, it was our AI, we got nothing to do with it. But really, it's up to people to ensure that there is some sort of human in the loop to understand what's going on with their AIs. You don't want the dinosaurs running amok in your theme park because no one will come to visit you. So of course, we want to make sure that you can convey that to your users where a human should be in the loop and make sure that they can have them in there. For the next architecture, what Drupal services, configurations, permissions, and queues own the work, you really want to make sure you understand what's going on under the hood for your solution, how it can not only work efficiently, but can also be locked down to not expose any information that it shouldn't. For security, and of course in government this is huge, you want to make sure that everything is going to be understood of what data is going to cross what boundaries, what things are going to be logged, because when it comes time for an internal security review or external review or an ATO, it can't be some vague answer of the data goes somewhere. You need to have a strong evidence trail of what happens with your data from the start to the end and everywhere that it's really accessible along the way. Adaptability, how we, sorry about that. Adaptability, how we change models, system prompts, retrieval, and policy safely. So this is all about flexibility. So when developing a module, there can be all sorts of needs and use cases. And so you just want to make sure that when people want to go to a different model to see how it works or performs for their needs, that they can do so very easily. It's not a cumbersome or inefficient process. It should just be a click of the button or a typing in of the name of the module or provider, and they'll be able to go to the next thing to try it out. And finally, validation. So this is also a big one in government, because really this is all about maintainability and accountability. So just because something's working today, it doesn't mean that it's going to be working properly in the future. So who is the person who's going to be accountable for this? So us as module developers, we're responsible for helping to patch these vulnerabilities that are found. Someone raises an issue on the queue, we go in, we see it, they open a merge request, we make sure it goes in there. So from that side, it would be you. But from the side of your module users, you want to make sure that they're empowered to have someone accountable on their side of things. And next, we'll talk about design principles. So first, we'll start with the mission workflow. So you're going to want to define a repeatable Drupal workflow that fits your mission. So what happens to the workflow after the AI output? What inputs are allowed and what must never be visible to certain users? Who reviews, overrides, rejects the outputs? What metrics can demonstrate that it improved the mission goals? So these are the things you always want to ask yourself. And sometimes you don't have these answers right off the bat. And if you can't answer any of these, you should ask yourself, is your proposed module implementation getting ahead of your use cases? Because these are the things that you really want to make sure you know the answers to. So Drupal always gives us a sort of practical place to make these workflows. And with Drupal, we can see how the workflows work, how they interact with other things, and it's very understandable, repeatable, and enforceable. So as an AI module creator, that's why Drupal is such a great tool to use, and you really want to embrace the things that Drupal gives you natively. And then you would like to lean on the community, of course, for any of your new modules that you want to put out there. You want to leverage the Drupal AI ecosystem, especially before inventing your own custom frameworks or one-off APIs, since this is going to reduce duplicated code and makes your module easier to maintain and audit. So we learned this very early on that this was very helpful. We created our AWS Bedrock chat module some years ago, and this was before the AI ecosystem really got up to speed, so there was no Bedrock providers who hook us up to AWS Bedrock from our Drupal side of things. And so we made our own custom integration on top of the AWS SDK, and that would give us authentication so we can talk to AWS Bedrock. And unfortunately, that sort of led us to being responsible for the maintenance, the security concerns, pretty much everything that could go wrong with this integration point. We owned it at that point since it was a custom sort of one-off inside of our module, because at that point the community did not have a provider that everyone could use. So this is just something you really want to be aware of. You want to make sure to evaluate other contrib modules, make sure that there's something that you could use, instead of writing something else, since you would save yourself essentially the headache of having to do all this extra work. And the community really would already be doing it for you, because it would be a module that's already out there. It's polished, people are looking at it, and with that being done on the other side, you can spend your time really working on your module and all of the unique capabilities that it provides. A module should have durable layers, an AI module especially, durable layers. So separate UI, policy, orchestration, providers, retrieval, and evidence. Shortcuts, of course, we always like to use, but we should only do that for demos or proof of concept. If you have a controller and you're having your controller call your module or your models, you don't really want to do that. You want to make sure you've got a service so it can link into all the things in between. Your Drupal UI, policy and configurations, your AI service, provider clients, retrieval and tools, reporting, and these are just examples of all sorts of things along the way of different layers. So each part of the AI workflow should have clearly defined responsibilities, and it should be replaceable without having to rewrite any of the others. And this is going to really help avoid any major rewrites that you need to do when something changes in one part, since essentially they're their own independent layers. And this is about AI modules, but of course this goes for all modules, but I'd say even more so for AI modules, because things are always changing so quickly in the AI ecosystem. And we'll just talk about the user experience really quickly. So for government platforms, user experience is a must, so you have to understand and have someone accountable for this, and the trust is really built through the scope, source, status, and human control. So there's the accessibility contract, so that's 508, WCAG, things like, keyboard accessibility, focus management, just a couple examples of things you would see on government websites or any website that's going to be catering to accessibility as it should. And then of course the trust contract. You want to show what the AI used to provide certain answers, how the user can correct or reject this, feedback mechanism, and of course some way for human escalation to happen. For AI modules, you want to make sure to call out that AI can be very confident in something, but of course anything AI generated should not always be presented as a fact. You want to allow your users to be given source evidence when possible, so they can review things and make sure that it really makes sense. You want to make sure that anything along the way, such as the status of the AI involvement or any possible actions that the user can take, should be clear for them. And for government audiences, of course, it never hurts to really call out the specifics like 508 and WCAG to make sure you're pointing to those authoritative sources so the users can go and see exactly what standards they should be upholding. And now putting it into practice. So we will talk a little bit about our AWS Bedrock chat module that we covered in depth last year at Drupal GovCon here. So last year's deep dive is available on the Drupal for Gov YouTube. You just need to search for the GovCon 2025 and it's on that playlist there. And so what the AWS Bedrock chat module is, it's pretty much an AI-driven chat inside of Drupal. It's an assistant that essentially is going to create a conversational discovery layer over an approved knowledge base that the client or whoever is going to use this is going to say, this is my knowledge base, my source of files, or whatever I want the AI to pull from. And that will essentially allow your tool to pull that out and chat with users only based on that information. So the admin, of course, is going to configure that knowledge base or agent. It's going to build the service request in Drupal. The Bedrock API is going to be hit, and then, of course, the response is going to come back and be rendered safely. And so this is just a quick screenshot of the configuration. So we have the settings for the switching between the knowledge base and agent. We've got the changing out of the models. We've got the changing of the knowledge base. We've got something that will allow a per block or per profile basis, and of course customization for public-facing purposes. And so this is just sort of like one of our quick demos that we did previously. So these are just kind of screenshots of what it can look like with public available data. So we just use US Consumer Product Safety Commission and the US Geological Survey. So on the left, we see we've asked it to tell me about CPSC. It goes out, it gets information, it comes back, it responds, and then it also provides source information. So that authoritative source information is where the user can click, go to that actual document on that agency's website and say, okay, I was given this answer from AI, and here's where that information actually lives, where it's pulled from, and it looks like it is actually legit because it comes right from here, and I can read it right here in this PDF. So this is really what you want to have done to make sure that the trust factor is there for your users of your modules.
Is that text that's generated, does that come from that document? Or does the
so this actually
LLM generate?
Yeah, so the LLM will generate it. So essentially this is just based on retrieval augmented generation, or RAG. So the knowledge base is just the source of documents. All of those get chunked up and embedded, and the LLM interprets your question, sends it off, looks at the documents, and responds in kind. So none of this would be verbatim from the documents. It just uses it as the source of information to respond in natural language. And now we'll talk about our newest module that we've been working on in our Digital Innovations Lab, our AI Content Optimizer. So our Content Optimizer improves content governance on large Drupal websites. Essentially, you have a content inventory that you have on your website. You can set all of your settings, your provider, your batching, thresholds. It will run different analysis layers and then give you reports and exports that you can use. You can understand what's going on with your website, your data, and then of course an editorial review loop which you can use to improve your content in the future, and of course iterate, run it again, make sure things are working as expected. So just a couple quick little screenshots from our module here. So just really going to run through this really quickly. There are all sorts of options here for the module, but we just wanted to have some concise items here. So they are closed right here, but we see our node field mapping, our taxonomy term field mapping. So these are just two entities that we've said, let's show the nodes and taxonomies, but of course you could select your media, you could select users, you could select pretty much everything Drupal has, and then you can drill down to the specific fields and say, I only want these fields to be exposed. Providers, models, so you want to go out and use the OpenAI, provider from the AI ecosystem, or OLAMA if you want to keep it local. You can select anything from those modules, submodules from the AI ecosystem, which will come up right here, and you'll be able to select whichever you'd like to use. We've got processing behaviors such as processing only changed content, re-indexing missing records, enabling generation of summaries by the LLM, source text limits, batch sizes, queue limits, pretty much a long laundry list of settings for the users to make sure it's going to be able to work for them, their environment, whatever sort of limitations they may or may not have in their infrastructure. So as I mentioned, this is just a small little snippet of the settings. But of course, we'll be able to go more in depth in that at a later time, or if anyone has any questions, feel free to stop by our booth. We're also going to be having a webinar which goes more in depth into all the settings and what this module actually does. On the right side, of course, we see a little bit about logging, AI retention of responses, storing of embeddings, and of course, diagnostics. And just hop into our next screen. So here we see the estimations on the left side of token usage for running those embeddings, and this really helps with understanding costs. And of course, you can set hard and soft limits on the token usage in the settings. So if you see there, essentially it's saying, hey, I'm going to generate these missing embeddings. These are the number of nodes. These are the taxonomies, menu items. So based on the selections from the previous settings, this is what it would come out with. And then it has an estimated input tokens, and then of course, since this is embedding, there's no output tokens. Essentially, it's just a mathematical vector that comes back, which is not really considered tokens because it's not really having an LLM response for that. And then on the right side, we can see a couple of our AI analysis, such as our taxonomy drift, our navigation or section misalignment. So pretty much something belongs in another content type, or something might need an additional tag, or doesn't belong on the navigation menu under a certain parent. These are the things that essentially define that, and thresholds here to set there. And then at the bottom here, we see our duplicate content, so either exact matching or semantic. And so this is what it looks like after a configuration, and we run our embedding. It will show our total eligible items based on the content that we've selected, the index semantic records, and so that is pretty much the results of our embeddings. So for those of you who don't know what embeddings are, it's pretty much what lets AI do the magic with different content files. It's what really works behind the scenes, and you can think of them almost like coordinates, but I guess way more advanced. So if you've got latitude and longitude, you're trying to find some place in 2D space, you've got your X and Y, that's only 2 items. But when you have these vector embeddings, you're more of a 3D, but way beyond 3-dimensional space, where the different numbers can help you convey sort of meaning and context. So with 2 items, you might say I have something that is orange and round. We've got 1 and 2. But if you have a 3rd item, you might say, hey, it's citrusy. So you say, hey, okay, now I've got an orange. Or your 3rd and 4th item could be it's bouncy and it's rubbery. Now I've got a basketball. So these things really help convey, what this item is when it's stored someplace, because it's just a mathematical representation of something that doesn't really make sense until you've got enough things to really give it meaning. So if you can see here, we can select different models to use. We've got the Quinn 3 embedding here, and this one gives 4,096 different items and data points that essentially would allow that context to come through. And then of course from there, the AI will do its thing. You can run different mathematical formulas such as cosine similarity, things that are going to score things and give you a confidence rating, and really let AI interpret the results as to what's going on. And here, it's going to be very hard to see, but essentially this is just what it looks like with a results listing here. So from our content optimizer, we said, hey, go ahead and run this. So it can say, okay, these are our findings. So on this long list here, it's going to say, oh, we found all these nodes, all these problems, findings, the severity, high, medium, low, different types of analysis. So our duplicate content, or taxonomy is drifted, or it's in the wrong section. Findings by the content types, status, is it still open? It needs to be addressed. Has someone seen this or reviewed it and it's been remediated? And then on the right side, we're going to see an overview of the dashboard. So it's just a couple charts here that kind of fit on this screenshot, but the list goes on and on. Here we see our chart for mission alignment. So essentially in the settings, you can put the mission of your agency. My agency does X, Y, and Z. And then all of your content that you've ingested and embedded will go and look on that and say, okay, so what is in alignment with our mission? What is really aligned with what we're doing as an agency, and what is in low alignment? So this will help you understand and build your content and say, okay, this is a really good piece of content. I should use this as a baseline for my future content. Or you can say, oh, this page does not make sense. Someone used this as a placeholder. It's got all of these file names and links without any context, and that's why it's coming up as a low mission alignment. Maybe I want to fix this up in the future. And then, of course, our findings, volume over time, showing some of the different analysis, and then kind of correlating it with the content growth. Then, as I mentioned, the charts and graphs kind of go on and on, but this is just what we threw on the screenshot here. And so this is what it looks like if you were to click into one of those findings. Again, it's probably a little hard to see, but so these are two items here. One on the left side is a possible taxonomy drift. So essentially we have a taxonomy. If you can see up top, in the top left, it says chemical ingestion. So on this particular website, they have a taxonomy with hazards, and one of them is chemical ingestion. But it says, hey, there seems to be a drift here. There's actually two of them. So we can see on the right side, there is a drift with the parent ingestion at the top, but then underneath there is a different section, blunt force down there, which also has chemical ingestion. So it looks like someone might have put this in the wrong spot, and this is essentially calling it out that, hey, this is a duplicate item that looks like it's in the wrong spot. And then it gives a confidence of what it believes, this to be, how certain that it is based on its scoring. And then we use the LLM to give a rationale. So of course this would be a little hard to see, but essentially it would tell you, this chemical ingestion, this is the ID of the term, it looks to be a duplicate because X, Y, and Z. On the right side, we see a semantic matching. Essentially, it is saying that, hey, this particular node over here appears to be a duplicate of this other node over here. It might be a little hard for you to see, but they're both published over here on the right side. Different ID numbers over here, so node IDs, entity IDs. It's a little off the screen, so I do apologize. But essentially it's saying, hey, these are essentially the same thing. And then of course that's where our score comes in, and then our confidence of that score. So a score of 1 and a confidence of 100 is essentially pretty certain. But of course, confidence is not a fact. AI is going to provide you the rationale of why it believes this to be the same. And essentially this is going to say they are near identical, content with only one character different. So it's got the content link here, so someone might have put an extra space in the middle of something. So if you were looking at an exact match with comparing one big string to another, if you've got a space in the middle or random characters that are off, it's not going to say this is an exact match. But when you have semantic similarities, you can essentially have it say this is the probability or likelihood that this is extremely close in its content, so it's most likely going to be somewhat of a match. And that's where our score comes in to say how much of a match that would be. And then our confidence essentially says how confident the AI is in that scoring. So just to remember, in AI world, confidence is great, but it's not fact. You need to actually read this, understand this, so it's ultimately up to the user to interpret these results and make the changes themselves. And so as I mentioned, this was just a super quick run through since we're going to be limited by time. But feel free to stop by the CTAC booth if you want to see more, see it in action, or get some more information on our webinar on this. So next we'll talk about profiles, which drive AI behavior. So Drupal, can make this AI data boundary explicit, reviewable, and deployable as configuration. As we can see in the content optimizer, those profiles are baseline configurations, set the items that can be executed upon. I selected content types, I selected fields, and of course you can select different items. So if you wanted to see a different subset, create a different version of that baseline, compare differences between different sets of parameters and data to allow a user to really understand what's going on or the story that their content is telling, you should be able to do that. And that's really what profiles allow you to do. You can choose those eligible sources, as I mentioned, the content types, fields, bound extracted text and filter runs by publication state, change date, and of course it hashes all the prepared data. So you don't want to have it crunching through things all the time if things are not changing. So everything's going to be hashed up. So if nothing changes, that hash doesn't change, it skips it and says, I'm only going to look at things that have changed. And of course, you want to preview your workload, process this asynchronously, and of course, send it for human review. You don't want AIs running amok in your theme park with your dinosaurs. And so all of this really is, a batchable, reviewable, or repeatable process, and that's why Drupal is really great to have a platform for AI on top of it, as it really creates a ton of value. It gives you your inventory from our example here, all of our nodes, files, taxonomies, and users. We can prepare it, we can embed it as we talked about, we can analyze it, We allow people to review it. That's where our human intervention comes in. And then, of course, improve it. The people are actually making the changes that are going to make this better on the next run through. And so we'll just mention security by design. So essentially, for community modules, especially ones that are dealing with moving or manipulating data, security, should be a constant factor. Assume every AI usage is data movement. So security starts before the model call and continues after the response. So classifying, minimizing, authorizing, guarding, logging, and retaining all help to stay on top of this. And I really just want to drive home the point of what Drupal really gives you. Built-in security means Drupal native enforcement. Use the platform controls, developers and auditors already understand, because when you're making an AI module, you really want this to seem boring to whoever's going to review this for your security plans. They don't want to be getting creative with, oh, this looks like some new stuff I've never seen before. They want to say, this is the same old stuff. Check the boxes, this lines up with exactly what I'm expecting it to be. And that's really what you want. And that is what Drupal will give you. So as a module creator, you're gonna really be responsible for controlling that movement of information. So you wanna rely on the vast number of things that Drupal is gonna give you out of the box: role checks, route permissions, cross-site forgery checks, reusable configuration, validation, service level checks, avoiding raw input logging, of course. All these things Drupal's gonna give you, and you really wanna lean on that. Things like guardrails on the provider side, once you get there, they're gonna help you filter out undesirable content and protect sensitive information. Someone asks for something and it might come back with PII. You're gonna have guardrails to sort of scrub that. Someone might ask for some FOIA document, but there's a FOIA exemption code, so it shouldn't be coming back. You're gonna have your guardrails catch that in time. But even though you're gonna have those guardrails on the other side, your Drupal module really has to own that use case policy. Data minimization is the responsibility of the Drupal module side. Nothing should leave your side without having all the proper enforcement from the forms, the services, the provider adapters, queues, pretty much everything that's going to move the user's data. You want to ensure that you are hooking into all of the great things that Drupal is going to give you off the bat. So we'll mention module adaptability. So LLM selection is a runtime strategy. LLMs are good at all sorts of different things. Some models are better at other things than others. So you want to make sure that you are going to be flexible with allowing the ability to switch between these. So I mentioned, AWS Bedrock, and that's just an example of one managed provider that's going to give you access to multiple models. So you want to make sure that the user is going to be able to use pretty much anything that they have access to see how it works for their specific use cases. So with the profiles and policies that I mentioned, that's going to allow them to make those changes quickly, easily, efficiently, without really adding any risk into the equation. And that's what you want it to be. You want it to be very easy. You want them to be happy. You want them to say, hey, I clicked the button, I want a new model, and it's great. So we'll go into our final section, operating AI. And so with testing and validation, you want to test the behavior, not just the code. So AI modules need regression testing around prompts, sources, model changes, and safety cases. You want to make sure you've got your golden prompt, something that you know what the answer is going to be. You tell it something, this is the evidence that's going to come back, and you know that. You want to have other people, red teams, not just yourself going on there and giving the same stuff. You want other people to throw things in the mix. You want to have grounded factuality checks. You want to minimize hallucinations. Essentially, you want to make sure you're following all the processes you can to keep this as secure as possible. You should follow the govern, map, measure, and manage solution, and this really follows the NIST AI risk management framework. And really at its core, it essentially just helps provide outcomes and actions that enable dialogue, understanding, and activities to manage AI risks and to responsibly develop trustworthy AI systems. Our operations, so every AI module is going to need an operation surface. So production AI work is cost, latency, observability, limits, and fallback, not only accuracy. The right admin dashboard is going to show enough to operate AI without exposing any of that sensitive data. So when you've got things like a budget, you're going to make sure it's measurable with real economic units. So not just this many tokens, but really what's the cost of those 1,000 tokens index? What's the cost of 100 conversations? Those are things that are meaningful to people who are going to be paying the bills at the end of the day. Logs, these should be anonymized and of course stored based on your organization policies. Latency, fallback, rate limits, drift, these are all things that need to be accounted for throughout the process, with some of these often requiring coordination with the DevOps side of things just to ensure stability and scalability in your particular infrastructure. And finally, we get to our 90-day pilot roadmap. So this is kind of what we came up with. It was just sort of like a plan of kind of creating and rolling out an AI module to get you from start to production. So your first 15 days is going to be your use case and governance. You're going to pick your bounded workflow, identify your data, define your owner, human review. Then your next 20 days is really getting into the architecture. You're going to be creating your profiles, service interfaces, your adapters, which ones you're going to use or allow people to use, or just open it up completely and make sure that it's going to make sense for all of them. Your permissions, your configuration schemas, and then your next 25 days is going to be your actual pilot and your evaluation. So you're going to build your minimal UX, you're going to create your golden prompts, run your safety cases, and of course measure your outputs. And then your final 30 days is going to be the logging, the dashboards, cost limits, training documents, and your release gates. So despite developing this plan, we always want to stick to plans to make sure we, avoid any scope creep. Don't have to go back to the client and say, well, it's taking longer than I thought. But of course, in reality, these things, are just sort of guidelines that you want to follow. But when you get into a situation where you've got, a production ATO, acquisition, privacy reviews, enterprise deployments, all these things, given the nature of coordination between different parties and real-world implementations, often can lead to longer time frames, but this is just a sort of base guideline that we came up with. So this first 90 days shouldn't attempt to solve every problem, but of course, it's best to pick one bounded workflow and build your platform on top of that based on patterns that you can reuse in the future. And lastly, we have our common pitfalls to avoid. So we want to build modules that are going to survive the next model, the next policy, and the next mission need. So our hard-coded models, we want to avoid that since that's going to break everything when your provider or policy changes. Bypassing Drupal access, we never want to do that since data can leak and we don't want to be responsible. And even though it's good to have those Wednesday updates and security notifications, you don't want to be irregular on those emails there. No operational surface, cost, latency, failures, prompt logging by default. It's going to create data retention and privacy risks. Evaluating on vibes, I'm a victim of this myself, maybe not a victim, but so it works well on my machine, but that cannot be the thing that happens. At the end of the day, you need to have some real, tangible information to say that this works. You want to have real metrics that really, drive home the point that this is working as expected. And finally, no plan for humans. So, most government use cases need human review and accountability. So we want to make sure that that can always be included. So, just remember that these AI modules are not used in a vacuum. So, the job of the AI module is not really complete when you get your answer or, you get your information back, but it's really when your organization or your agency can use it over time, they can safely change things are coming back, they see the value, and then they still have trust in its continued efficacy. And that is it. So we will ask if there are any questions. Yes?
Two questions.
Sure.
First, in the government, we're always struggling with people trusting us and trusting the information. So that makes me wonder, when you've done this, have you done it at any government sites, A, and B, are they labeling the content created with AI or some other label so that the person reading it, especially if it's public facing, outside facing, knows that AI was utilized
Okay.
in the creation of the content?
So the first question is, government, often people do not trust the things that come back. So with using AI, has this been done on government websites, and do they label it explicitly with AI? So essentially, I understand in the climate that we're in, sometimes people say, hey, I don't know if that's legit information coming back. So a lot of the things that we do with our agencies, are internal. So a lot of things can be public facing, but often the government does use things for internal purposes for their employees to be able to quickly get the information, to quickly, know what's going on, to answer questions for the public. So I can't say specifically that any of this is public facing that we've given, but we do work with agencies to have it internally facing. And for them, they have a long training and documentation process. So it doesn't doesn't explicitly tell them that, hey, this is an AI result, because they've gone through all of the training and have the documentation where they're already sort of in the know, as opposed to someone from the public where they would actually want to see something that says, hey, this is an AI response.
Then the second was, so I could pass it on to colleagues, when is your webinar on this topic?
So our webinar, second question is, when is our webinar on this topic? So it will be in September.
I got it.
September 23rd
September 23rd.
at 11.
At 11 o'clock.
Thank you very much.
Yep. So, and of course you can scan the QR code here, reach out to us, or go to the CTAC website, and I'm sure you can sign up there. Or of course you can stop by our booth if you really quickly just want to chat about it or see something cool. Any other questions? Yes.
On your example where you're showing it do the indexing, and it looked like you had like 5,000 pieces of information.
Yep.
Like that. Is the rebuild and like the re-indexing, where's the compute power coming from that? Is it coming from within the site itself, or is it being offloaded somewhere?
Yep, so the question is, for our example, on the content optimizer where we are showing the embeddings that have been performed, where is the compute power coming for that to be able to process all of that? So essentially for that, there's a sort of, I guess, two parts to it. There's the embedding and chunking, which has to be done by model. So it has to go somewhere else. Of course, you can keep it locally. So these, if you saw, it showed Olama, so it doesn't go out to, ChatGPT or anywhere outside. It stays internally. Drupal essentially is going through the specific items that have been chosen. So that's where our profile comes in. Essentially, we hit the button, it says, okay, I'm using profile baseline 4, so I'm getting these 4 content types, these 10 fields, and I'm going to process them and send them off to Olama or wherever else that's going to do the embedding. So Drupal is responsible for the queuing, the batching, the pulling of the specific fields and information, and then sending it off to the source. The chunking and embedding is done there, and then returned to Drupal. So currently we make it so you can store it right there in your MySQL database or whatever database you're using in Drupal. It will create a custom field, and you can see the long string of a huge embedding vector there. But of course, if you have external things like PG vectors or other things that are more tailored to specific AI embedding or usages, we're going to have a connector for that as well. So to answer your question, it's done partially in Drupal, just the management of the information, but the actual embedding and turning it into that mathematical vector is done in the model itself.
It would follow. How
Sure.
long has it taken it with the churn on an initial launch on a site like something like that with 5,000?
So it really depends on what you've got on your site. So as we showed, you can set your batching limits, you can set your concurrency limits. So really, you could see the process if you throw up. I always open my logs so I can see it on my Olama. Things go back and forth. In under a second per item usually. Of course, if you've got some crazy amounts of data, bigger fields, because you can set a limit. So you can say I only want to pull the first 5,000 characters. If your site does not have a big infrastructure, you've got a lot of content, but you don't have really powerful infrastructure underlying it. Maybe you turn that limit down a little bit, or maybe your fields, you're not going to use as many fields. But of course, you have complete control over how many things you add into it, and that's really going to dictate how long it's going to take for it to process. All right, any other questions? No? All right, great. Well, thank you all for joining.